if you are a guitar player, or if you are a person who has heard the term rock music, then you're probably familiar with the idea of playing guitar with a signal that is broken up or dirty or overdriven or distorted on purpose. And in this video, I'm going to show you 5 different ways to think about producing a guitar signal like that so that you can design your own ideal dirt sound. For starters, let's talk about where dirt comes from. Every piece of gear that has an audio signal move through it has some amount of volume that is the most volume it can take. And if you give it more volume than that, it will distort. Anytime you ever hear any distortion of any kind, it just means that at least one component somewhere was getting more volume than it can handle. So for pro tip number 1, if you want to generate some dirt, I think the first place to look is your amp. Can your amp break up at all by itself? If your amp is a Fender amp, then the answer is maybe. If your amp is a Marshall amp, then the answer is definitely. But in any case, if your amp can break up at all, the first thing to do is to run an overdrive pedal into it. Now, one obvious starting point is the Boss SD1 Super Overdrive. I've been using this for years. But 90% of what any overdrive pedal is doing is just adding volume to your signal to push the amp past its capacity.
Fight.
So the first thing to do is to just put the level knob on your overdrive to maximum. Okay. The other 10% of what an overdrive pedal does is it'll produce a little bit of distortion on its own, and it'll concentrate your frequencies a little bit in the mid-range. But both of those things are meant to fuse with the dirt sound that's already in your amp and then push it into this higher, more beautiful level of distortion. Okay, let's listen to some examples. This is how I have my amp set just by itself. And this is what it sounds like if I run a super overdrive into that. Now, I think both of those sounds are usable. In fact, I think the best thing to do is to combine those sounds and layer them on top of each other. So for what you're about to hear, I double-tracked myself just using my amp, and then I overdubbed myself with one track using the super overdrive. And you'll hear the super overdrive track has this extra sparkle. There's this piercing, bee sting sparkle quality that helps it push through everything else that's happening. For pro tip number 2, what if your amp just does not break up on its own? Some amps will never do it. The Roland Jazz Chorus is not going to do it. In my opinion, the Fender Twin does not realistically do it. What then? Well, you can use a pedal to do it. In this example, we're going to use the Benson Preamp. This pedal is going to create the dirt, and then we're just going to send that dirt into a clean amp. Let's listen to some examples. Here's how I have my new clean amp set. And this is with the Benson Preamp. As you can hear, that's a tighter, more power pop style of breakup. But I think the crucial pro tip for this whole video is if you're working with these kinds of guitar sounds and you want them to sound as rich as possible, usually you want a double track. By the way, if you want to buy any of the gear in this video, I have affiliate links that will give me a small commission on anything you buy. I'll put the affiliate links in the video description. Money. Next, we're going to talk about pedal order. Remember in the last pro tip, I was using the Benson Preamp for my dirt? Could I use other pedals with this to drive it even harder and get even more distortion out of it? The answer is absolutely yes. In this example, the other pedal is going to be the 29 JFET boost. This is a pretty clean boost. It's just making my signal louder, but it's not adding much dirt of its own. Should it go before or after the Benson Preamp? Well, I'm going to play for you both ways. This is the Benson Preamp by itself. This is with the 29 boost first. And this is with the 29 boost second. As you can hear, when it was first, it made this more distorted, but it didn't really get louder. And when it was second, it made it louder, but it didn't really change the tone. That's normally how this goes. If you run more volume into something that's already dirty, it just takes that volume and converts it to more dirt. It can't really get louder. I said at the beginning of this video, dirt is what happens when something gets more volume than it can take. Once it gets there, it can't really get louder in the sense of like the amplitude of the waveform increasing. That's what we perceive as volume, and like that amplitude is stuck where it is. Okay, so what does that mean for you? If you want some like quick and dirty advice, if you're gonna use 3 dirt pedals on your board, here's what I think is like the most realistic, most useful way to do it. Put the one that generates the most distortion in the middle, put a clean boost after it so you can just get louder if you need to, and then put another boost or an overdrive in front of it so that you can drive it harder and get more distortion if you need to. This is also why amps have effects loops. If you're using your amp to get breakup, putting a boost in the amp's effects loop will make it louder. Putting a boost in the front of the amp will just make it more saturated and more distorted. Another thing I should say is that the cleaner your amp is, the less an effects loop makes a difference. The whole point of an effects loop is that it lets you put effects after the dirt in your amp. But if there isn't much dirt to begin with, then putting a boost in the front of your amp or in the effects loop is going to sound almost the same, or even possibly exactly the same. For pro tip number 4, we're going to talk about distortion pedals. Now, what is a distortion pedal? What is the difference between a distortion pedal and all the other pedals we talked about in this video so far? In my honest opinion, the answer is not much. There's a sense in which every pedal in this video is a distortion pedal because they're all producing distortion somehow. And every pedal in this video is a preamp pedal because they're all going before the amp. And every pedal in this video is an overdrive pedal because they're all being used to drive some component over its tolerance. Okay, conversationally, usually the difference is meant to be something like this. A distortion pedal sort of creates distortion by itself and wants to go to a clean amp. An overdrive pedal wants to work with your amp to produce an enhanced version of your amp's distortion. I think that's one way to think about it that is like not incoherent. Another way to think about it in conversation is that like overdrive pedals produce an amount of distortion that is appropriate for like classic rock, and distortion pedals produce an amount of distortion that is appropriate for heavy metal. In any case, my 2 favorite distortion pedals are the MXR 5150 and the Fairfield Circuitry Barbershop. This is what they sound like. Here's my amp. Here's the 5150. Here's the Barbershop. In my opinion, the 5150 is like more high-tech and saturated, and the Barbershop is more blunt and has like more thud. But once again, I think the coolest thing to do is to use both of them and double track with each. For pro tip number 5, you can get some previously undiscovered dirt sounds by running a boost into your other pedals and seeing what happens. Now, I don't want you to kill your other pedals. You should look up what their maximum allowance is. But if you don't kill them, you can get some cool results. For instance, I have a vintage MXR Phase 100 with a script logo. If I run the 29 boost into this, it'll break up. This is what it sounds like by itself. This is what it sounds like with the boost. I think that's a pretty cool, unusual dirt sound. You can hear the phasing, but to me, that's just part of it. That's part of the character. Another go-to for me is the Shallow Water by Fairfield Circuitry. This is not normally discussed as an overdrive pedal. It's like a random chorus pedal, but it has a JFET stage at the input, and you can drive that. So this is what this pedal sounds like by itself. And as you can hear, you can dial out the random chorus if you want to, which I did. This is what it sounds like if you run a boost into it. Again, that's a very usable dirt sound. And you know what I'm going to do next, right? Now I'm going to use both of those pedals to double track myself.